Chapter 17 Grand Theft Auto Galactic Edition. The afternoon sun baked the sweat from Gavin's skin as he ran up the stairs toward the street, Isla and Seth close behind. Sirens howled in all directions as Brazilian National Police cruisers screeched to a halt on the sidewalk. Officers ran toward them, assault rifles trained on anyone emerging from the tunnel. "Those are big guns!" Seth shouted, throwing his hands up. "I got this," Gavin said. He ran over to the closest officer, face bending in fear and confusion. "Eles estão no túnel," he cried, grabbing the cop's arm frantically. "Eles jogaram ácido no rosto dele." Tears trickled down Gavin's cheeks as he shook the man like a rag doll. A sergeant wearing an official uniform and red beret ran up, pulling Gavin aside and telling him to calm down and take a breath. "I'm sorry," he continued. "Desculpa." Gavin stumbled back, distraught and tearful. "Dude, are you all right?" Seth asked, grabbing him by the shoulders. "I am sorry your friend has perished," Isla said, eyes wide with worry. Gavin grabbed them both and ushered them away from the growing cadre of police. "I'm fine. I just didn't want the cops to think we were involved and search me. I have a gun in my pants, remember? I told them somebody got acid thrown in their face in the tunnel, which is true enough. I figured that would get them to shuffle us along." "So what was with all the crying then?" Seth questioned. Gavin wiped the tears from his cheeks, eyebrows arching in puzzlement. "Tears make people uncomfortable. I was acting. You know I have an Academy Award, right?" Seth punched him in the arm as they muddled through the crowd. "I thought you were having a nervous breakdown." "Very clever," Isla admitted. The group moved in sync with the rest of the evacuees, police guiding them across the street toward a pavilion with a bronze statue of a man riding a horse into battle as its centerpiece. "We have limited time," Isla continued. "We need to find your father and escape. If we head north toward the state park, there's a favela, a slum, about 2 miles from here. It'll be easy to hide inside because the shacks are built so close together. And then there's like 10,000 people living there. It's not the safest place in the world, but as long as we keep our heads down, we can navigate it pretty safely, I think." Gavin grabbed Isla by the hand and pulled her and Seth along the edge of the large monument. People cried out about seeing men in armor and a flying ship. Others grabbed at police officers, pleading for them to help in finding lost friends, possibly still inside the Galleria. Gavin moved quickly out of the crowd toward a side street and the safety of the congested city. "We need to find a place to lie low for a minute so we can figure things out," he said, still holding Isla's hand as they rushed past parked cars and pedestrians running to get a closer look at the chaos down the street. A stairway leading down to a basement apartment drew closer on their left. Several olive-green metal chairs sat at the bottom between an ashtray and some discarded magazines. Gavin bolted down the steps, placing one of the chairs against the far wall, and stood on it so he could see in the direction of the Galleria. Police blocked off the intersections and sidewalks leading back to the Praça da República. Seth took the second chair and followed Gavin's lead, peeping over the edge so only the top of his head could be seen from the street. "Can we get back to the train station to find your dad?" Seth asked. People clogged the avenue in every direction. Television news vans arrived on scene. Word of a spaceship and alien showdown in downtown São Paulo had traveled fast. "I don't think we can. Not this way. We could go around, I guess, but that'll take an hour at least, and I don't want any cameras to catch sight of us." "We must find him," Isla said, standing in the shadow of the apartment building behind the two men. "Raymond spoke true regarding the balance of death. The Athelbrath militia are true believers. If they are given permission by their superiors, they will ritualistically terminate 2 other beings, just as they did Mr. Cummings." "Tracy," Gavin breathed, still picturing the man's head dissolving in the Athelbrath's hands. "I didn't really hate that guy. I mean, I did, but, you know." "We'll have to warn him later." Seth jumped down from his chair. "So we get your dad somehow, hide in the slum, and hijack a ship that's landing somewhere we don't know." "Well, when you put it that way," Gavin began. "It sounds like we're screwed, I know," Seth finished. "Crap," Gavin said, pacing around the small porch area. He'd tired of running. Too many of their encounters had forced them to play defense. The time had come for an offensive move. What could they do? What assets did they control? Gavin counted only 2, Isla's fighting skill and Gavin himself as the white rabbit everyone currently chased. Seth had proven himself capable and strong too. Several options began to coalesce. They would have to risk everything, but at this point, that's all they had left to throw on the table. They needed a spaceship. Maybe one could be made available before sunset. "What are you thinking?" Isla asked. Can you fly an Athelbrath ship? Gavin asked. Yes, she answered. The controls are similar to all Commonwealth craft. Excellent, Gavin said. Seth nodded in understanding. You're thinking we can steal theirs and fly out of here? We don't have any weapons other than the gun with one bullet in your pants. Isla is a weapon, Gavin pointed. Plus, if they think I'm going willingly, they'll have their guard down. How many Athelbrath are left at this point? It can't be that many. True, Isla agreed. There are likely no more than 3 remaining with Raymond, 4 at most. 2 of them would likely exit the ship with Raymond, leaving a pilot and possibly 1 other on board. We would need to be in a location with many buildings and access below the street for us to conceal ourselves. They would likely do a thermal scan of the area to verify you were alone. We would be invisible to their search beneath several feet of concrete. See? We create a distraction, storm the ship, and take off. Easy peasy. Except that their atmosphere is slightly different than what humans breathe, Isla warned. It isn't toxic, but after a short time, a quarter hour, I believe, as you measure time, we will begin to feel very ill without a respiration filter of some type. Halford would have to use one, right? We can steal his, Seth replied. That would mean only one of us could tolerate a journey of any perceivable length, Isla said. Gavin smiled. What if we only needed it long enough to steal your mom's ship? Isla grinned in reply. That could work. We commandeer the Athelbrath ship, set it on autopilot to pull my mother into the open while our Dubaku craft is landed, and abscond with the vessel. That's better than what I had planned, Gavin admitted. We just need to get Raymond's attention. If this works, we won't need to find my dad at all. We can contact him after somehow and tell him I'm okay. He'll be safer that way too, away from the Athelbrath. A group of teenagers wearing green and white school uniforms ran by along the street above, shouting about a military incursion nearby with a big flying ship like out of a movie. Gavin knew what to do. He darted up the stairs, shouting after the teens. Where are you going now? Seth called after him. Hey, stop, potty! Gavin yelled, grabbing one of the boys by his school backpack. The young man, tall and lean, with a mop of black hair, turned with an annoyed glare on his face. Okay, he questioned. Vocês gostam dos filmes? Gavin asked. You like movies? O que você quer, cara? The boy answered. What do you care? Gavin put his hands on his hips heroically, chest pushing outward. So, Gavin Baller. Sai daqui, the boy dismissed, waving his hand. One of the girls, a long black braid running down her shoulder and half covering the gold crest of some prep school, pointed with a grin. Gavin Baller! Ele é sério! Gavin Baller! Seth and Isla came up beside the group, confusion evident on their faces. Why don't you take a picture of us with the girl's phone? Gavin said, nudging Seth. Vamos tirar uma foto! The girls squealed at the invitation, while the boys postured, trying to look cool in front of the actor. Now we want our pictures taken? Seth questioned. I understand, Isla said. It will work. Você fede, meu, one of the young men said, crinkling his nose at Gavin. Yeah, you don't smell so great yourself, kid, Gavin mocked. 3 of the girls pulled out their phones like lightning, jumping forward to get a selfie with Gavin. One of the boys asked if all the commotion downtown was because of a movie being filmed. Seth dutifully took the cells and photographed the group in different poses. Gavin grabbed one of the phones and asked the girl if he could post the picture to her Facebook account. She readily agreed, shouting for joy. Pressing the social media app on her screen, Gavin pulled up the picture to upload, tagging his actor account in the process. What are you typing? Seth asked. An invitation, Gavin answered. His fingers tapped quickly across the screen. Raymond Halford, I have decided to give myself up to you. Meet me at Tia's place in 2 hours. I'll be there waiting. No tricks. Just let me get Seth and my dad to safety, and I'll be there alone. He hit the post button and handed the phone back to the excited young woman. Seth's lips squeezed together in an uncertain smirk. Did we just tell the devil where to find us? We're about to show the devil what happens when you screw with Gavin Baller and his friends. We don't have a lot of time, but I think I figured out how to use the last bullet in my gun. You got any change left from the cash my dad gave you for lunch? Seth reached into his pocket and pulled out several colorful Brazilian real bills. I have a couple bucks left. Why? We need to catch a bus back to my grandpa's place. Let's go. Gavin stood in the dirt parking area in front of his grandfather's shop, late afternoon light shining on the dusty windows. The abandoned complex appeared unchanged from the day before, except burn marks scorched the ground in places, and one of the front corner walls of the building had caved in from the brief battle. Decayed produce hung on the air, a reminder of the Athelbrath paralytic. Pigeons pecked at the ground nearby where grayish-green slime had dried among the rocks. An old manhole cover 20 feet away concealed Isla and Seth's hiding place in the sewer. A smile crept across Gavin's face. He had walked alone to the rendezvous just in case the Athelbrath monitored from above. This forced Seth and Isla to enter the sewer several blocks away and count manholes until they reached the right one. Now Gavin wouldn't be the only person who stank. Hopefully, if Raymond thermo-scanned the area as Isla feared, the brick and mortar walls of the drainage pipe would be enough to conceal them. Their plan would be over before it started if they were discovered. Gavin had positioned himself close enough to the building that the Athelbrath would need to land more or less on top of the manhole to pick him up. Another variable he couldn't control, but his instincts told him would work. More and more he appreciated his newfound intuition. It must have always been there. After all, he rarely picked bad films to act in or made life decisions that led to negative consequences. But still, being aware of it had changed everything. He understood the speed of the wind and the number of bricks littering the dirt lot. In a high school psychology class, his teacher had taught about the subconscious mind's ability to process thousands of data points a second, while the conscious mind could handle 5 or 6 at most. Gavin realized his conscious mind must have a stronger connection to the subconscious, allowing him to understand information and details others missed. He couldn't wait to develop the skill further. A light rumble tickled the air around Gavin, vibrating the molecules against his skin. The Athelbrath ship approached. It would arrive in 5 seconds by the intensity of the sound, descending from somewhere overhead and to the south. Gavin looked up toward the clouds, a shadow swiftly descending. Dust and small pebbles billowed on the wind, caught up in the spacecraft's downdraft. Gavin shut his eyes until the assault of small particles subsided. When he opened them again, the damaged chrome Athelbrath vessel filled his view, right on top of the manhole as hoped. A blast of air followed a metallic squeal. White beams of light appeared on the ship's front end, forming a rectangle just as Gavin remembered from that night standing in front of his pool. A door lowered to the ground, revealing the interior of the Athelbrath craft. Gavin hadn't gotten a good look at it during his initial encounter, and for the first time, details took shape. Instead of hydraulics and metal tubes running along the walls like Gavin expected, everything appeared organic in nature. Tendrils hung from the ceiling like gray vines in a forest, dark, textured walls like tree bark running from floor to ceiling. A layer of moisture covered every surface as if a light rain had fallen inside the ship. The familiar stink rolled from inside, sour and sweet with a hint of death, mixing with a negligible smell of propane. Curiosity almost got the better of him as he stepped forward to get a closer look. 2 Athelbrath descended the ramp, putting an end to his eagerness. They flanked him, running on either side of Gavin and raising their left hands in preparation to fire. Gavin flinched, worried they wouldn't take any chances and just paralyze him then and there. Arms raised like a suspect cornered by police, Gavin waited for green slime to smack him in the face. "I'm surprised," Raymond said, slowly walking down from inside the ship. "I thought you and Zaire might be trying something, but all our scans show you're alone." "I'm glad." His perfectly tailored suit, now creased and dirty with a grayish-brown stain on the shirt from where Zaire had shot him, no longer framed the man quite as impressively. "Zaire and I had a bit of a falling out," Gavin said. Raymond approached, walking firmly but with casual swagger. "And why is that?" "Because she told me she'd kill me." A smile broadened Raymond's face. "You can put your hands down, Gavin," he said, waving at the Athelbrath to lower their arms as well. "So she admitted it to you." Gavin placed his hands at his side, but wiggled his fingers to keep them alert. "She said too many lives were at risk and that fear would bring everything down. Is that true?" "Yes," Raymond nodded. "I won't lie, there will be a lot of upheaval in the Commonwealth. But what will happen if we do nothing is much worse, trust me. They're coasting toward a cliff, tranquilly looking the other way. The hierarchy is not the benevolent force they pretend to be." Movement beneath the Athelbrath ship drew Gavin's glance. Isla and Seth slowly emerged from the manhole, lying low to the ground. "So you think more people will die if I don't go with you? You believe in all of this fear infection nonsense?" Gavin asked, trying to stall. "I'm honestly not worried either way. You'll find some life forms to be less valuable than others. Raymond put his hands on Gavin's shoulders. Fear is necessary. The fact that the perennials are so terrified of it should show you how stupid and contradictory the whole thing is. You'll see. The Dubaku think that you being a rich and privileged actor is a bad thing. For me, it couldn't be better. I'm sure you'll see things my way, given the lifestyle you're used to living. In fact, I'm pretty positive you will. Raymond grinned like a viper, eyes narrowing. Gavin picked up subtle changes in his body language and slight perspiration forming below the skin's surface. Raymond was a good liar, but now that Gavin paid attention, he could see even the slightest changes in movement indicating discomfort. Raymond's plans for Gavin involved worse things than he let on, which made Gavin smile. Taking Raymond down would be more pleasurable than he had anticipated. "I'm sure I will," he said, placing his right hand on Raymond's shoulder, mirroring the actions of the older man. "I'm also sure you're gonna hate me." "And why's that?" Raymond asked, frustration replacing pretend mirth on his face. Isla and Seth stepped from beneath the craft into full view. The Athelbrath jerked back in alarm. Isla pointed her gun toward the propane tank 30 feet to Gavin's left. "Because I'm about to steal your ship," he said, holding tight to Raymond's suit jacket. Gavin had learned from some of his pyrotechnic friends on movie sets that you couldn't just shoot a propane tank and get it to explode. You needed a leak so that the gas could escape and mingle with the oxygen in the atmosphere. When Gavin had arrived at the shop, the first thing he'd done was break the regulator nozzle on the rusted tank with a rock, allowing the remaining gas to begin seeping into the air. Now all he needed was a spark. Isla fired their last bullet, hitting the nozzle dead center and sending a fireball in all directions. Heat accompanied a terrible roar, blowing Gavin, Raymond, and the two Athelbrath to the ground. Flames licked at Gavin's back, singeing his hair and skin. Raymond cried out in shock, head banging against the gravel. The spacecraft rocked with the blast, engines cycling back to life and lifting a few feet off the ground. Seth ran over, brandishing a heavy lead pipe, and began beating the Athelbrath on the head. The pipe clanged loudly against the armored helmets, but the force of the blows could not be denied. The helmet of the first alien cracked when Seth connected with the backside, and the Athelbrath dropped motionless to the ground. Without hesitating, Seth moved to his second target. Isla jumped up the ramp toward the ship's interior and disappeared inside before it could fly off. Gavin rolled on top of Raymond and pinned him to the ground, his fingers wrapped around the well-dressed man's neck, squeezing his larynx. Yellow and red firelight danced against the buildings, the smell of burning wood and roasting brick storming the senses. "You threatened my dad and killed Tracy Cummings, you son of a bitch," Gavin spat. "You honestly think I'd go with you?" "They'll come for you," Raymond gasped, face red with fury. "They'll never stop. You could kill me, but they'll never stop. Zaire will kill you." "Only if she gets the chance." Gavin slammed down his right fist, shattering Raymond's nose and leaving him unconscious in a single punch. Over his shoulder, the Athelbrath ship cantered from side to side, smashing against the building in front of them and pulling a section of wall down into the parking area. Bricks tumbled in all directions. The craft teetered to the left, blowing a hole in the second abandoned shop, all with the front ramp still open. "They're going to crash that thing before we can even get on board," Seth yelled, running up to Gavin and tossing his pipe at the two unmoving Athelbrath. "Are they dead?" Gavin asked, standing up and stepping over Raymond's prone form. "I don't think so," he answered. "Isla told me a few good hits to the back part of their helmets should lay them out." The ship swerved erratically, coming low to the ground and then shooting up 20 feet before shifting to the right. Finally, the craft tipped forward, launching toward Gavin and Seth. "Watch out!" Seth yelled, jumping out of the way. The spaceship hit the gravel nose up and skidded forward, pushing the surrounding earth into a small crater along its edges. 5 feet from Gavin's nose, it finally lurched to a stop. Engines cycled down, spitting dust in Gavin's mouth. He coughed and waved his hand in front of his face to clear his line of sight. "Is Isla okay?" Seth asked, stumbling through the smoke and particles. Gavin spit dirt off his teeth. "I don't know." Smoke filled the area, cutting off the light from the setting sun and replacing it with the fire's red and orange highlights. Heat baked the sweat from their arms and faces. A shape climbed up from the now crooked ramp toward them. Standing tall and elegant against the debris and vapor of the crash, Isla arose unscathed. "Get on board!" she shouted without preamble. "We have a problem." Gavin helped Seth climb over the pile of dirt and bricks while Isla lowered her hand to lift him to the ramp. "What's wrong?" Gavin asked, jumping onto the inclined entrance. A rush of warmth and humidity acted as his introduction. He breathed deeply, feeling suddenly lightheaded as if not enough oxygen filled his lungs. The smell of rotten fruit intensified and would easily make him nauseous given enough exposure. Before I could incapacitate the pilot, he sent a distress signal that was answered immediately. There is a second ship in low atmosphere synchronicity. "There's another Athelbrath spaceship in orbit?" Seth asked. Isla nodded. "We tracked a vessel for 2 full cycles and anticipated their advent here on Idumea. When we arrived and found Raymond Halford already on planet, we assumed our tracking had been misread. Only now do I see that we were incorrect. The ship we tracked arrived earlier today as originally extrapolated." Seth threw his hands in the air. "What do we do?" "We find out where that beacon is and we fly to it now," Gavin answered. "I agree." Isla held up her black mechanical bracelet and pushed one of the small knobs. A light flickered and danced, blinking intermittently. "It is to the north, as you hypothesized. We can track its exact location from the air. The ramp will no longer close, I fear. Step into the ship but remain close to the opening. The fresh air will keep you from feeling too affected by the vessel's atmosphere." She turned and ran inside, motioning for Gavin to follow. "What do you need?" he asked. "Help me remove this unconscious Athelbrath before he awakens." She pointed to a motionless alien lying just inside the ship. Gavin lifted from the legs while Isla grabbed under the arms. The armored Athelbrath didn't weigh as much as Gavin expected. He tossed the creature next to Raymond and stepped away from the open hatch as Isla ran past him toward the mysterious cockpit. "I kind of want to go in there farther and check things out," Seth said, stepping past the ramp toward the inside of the ship. "Yeah, I'd prefer not to throw up," Gavin admitted, standing next to Seth. "If everything goes according to plan, we'll be in another spaceship soon enough and it won't make us sick." The ship growled, engines vibrating to life. Gavin grabbed one of the vine-like cords hanging next to him for support. Its slick surface left an oily residue on his hand. Moisture dripped from the ceiling, hitting the back of his neck. He wiped it away with his fingers, giving the liquid a whiff with his nose. The pungent odor almost made him stumble back in revulsion. How did Raymond always manage to look so clean and dapper all the time walking around in this wet ship? "I don't think I'm ever going to smell good again," Gavin said to himself. Seth stepped away from the opening, arms out as if balancing himself. Gavin grabbed his shoulders. "Hold on to something so you don't fall out." The ramp slowly pulled from the dirt as the craft lifted a few feet off the ground, showering more tiny droplets of stinking liquid onto the pair. The ship shifted from left to right violently, forcing Gavin and Seth to plant their feet and hold tight to the nearest object. "I thought you said you knew how to fly one of these," Gavin shouted over his shoulder. No response answered his inquiry from deeper in the craft, which continued to jolt unexpectedly 3 feet from the ground. Something moved in front of the ship, catching Gavin's eye. Raymond Halford sat up, touching his broken nose with a scowl. Slowly, the Athelbrath craft began to rise higher in the air. "Sorry about this, Ray," Gavin shouted, drawing the man's attention. "I'll take you out to lunch and make it up to you sometime." Without warning, the ship rocketed upward, sending the contents of Gavin's stomach into his feet. Wind blew through his hair and into his eyes, but once he adjusted to the feeling and looked out on the rapidly retreating city below, elation filled his chest. "This is awesome!" Seth shouted over the deafening airflow. The craft leveled out, slowing to a stop amidst the clouds. In the distance, the sun moved over the horizon in colors of red, orange, and purple. Nothing could be as exhilarating as this, Gavin thought, eyes on the world at his feet. He wanted to leap into the sky like he had from Tracy's airplane, but something in his mind told him there would be no option available to keep him alive, so he abstained. "Isla, this is amazing!" he shouted, turning toward the interior of the ship. Suddenly, a bit of nausea didn't seem so bad if he could see the view from her seat in the cockpit. He stepped farther inside. Organic shapes and strange, twisted features that glowed slightly tugged at his attention. The wall to his right shifted strangely, moving like sand falling into a hole. Fascinating patterns emerged in a twisting motion, pulling apart slowly, almost like a giant gray flower in bloom. A doorway appeared, leading down an unseen hallway. An Athelbrath stepped out and stood in front of Gavin, craning its neck like a teenager woken by an early alarm clock. "Gavin, watch out!" Seth yelled, pulling his friend back toward the open ramp. "Isla!" Gavin shouted. "You missed one!" The alien raised its left hand and fired green paralytic in a single motion. Gavin darted out of the way, looking for a defensive weapon to use, but found none. He wished in that moment he'd picked up Seth's discarded iron pipe. Isla jumped from what appeared to be a stairway to the left, kicking the Athelbrath in the head and pitching it toward the ramp. Gavin leaped in to help, trying to avoid touching the alien's snot-covered left hand. He balled his fist and threw a punch, knuckles connecting painfully with the creature's armored face. "Ah, damn it!" he yelled, wiggling his fingers as if to expel the sting from his hand. The Athelbrath fired at Isla, mucus-like substance spattering the wall behind her. "Throw him from the vessel!" she shouted. Gavin grabbed the alien by the forearm and swung him toward the open ramp. Seth jumped out of the way to avoid tumbling out with the brute. The Athelbrath grabbed the ramp's edge, smearing his olive sludge across the surface in the process. Gavin ran forward and kicked the alien in the helmet, hoping to dislodge its grip. He kicked again, sending the Athelbrath skidding backwards toward a very long drop. Reaching to its belt, the Athelbrath tossed a gravity bomb as Gavin kicked a third time and knocked the creature loose. As if in slow motion, Gavin watched the alien start to fall from the ship as the dangerous explosive soared past his head toward the open door. "Catch it!" Seth cried, diving toward the gravity bomb. Before he could reach it, the singularity hit the side of the Athelbrath craft and exploded with a shriek. The spaceship tilted as a bubble formed, half inside and half outside, pulling all three of them toward the center. Gavin held onto the ramp as long as he could until the force of gravity pried his hands loose and swallowed him into the bubble. Floating, unable to control any movement, Gavin resigned himself to the temporary weightlessness. "Hey guys," he said, waving. "It's good to see you." "We are in great danger," Isla warned, flipping upside down to Gavin's left. "Once the bubble dissipates, we will need to grab hold of whatever we can." "What's going to happen?" Seth questioned. Gavin closed his eyes, remembering when he'd thrown a gravity bomb inside the Athelbrath ship during their attack on Tracy's plane. "We're going to fall, aren't we?" "That is correct," Isla answered. "The gravity generators of the vessel will recalibrate after the singularity terminates. Until then, we will plummet." 4 seconds, Gavin calculated. "Brace yourselves." The bubble blinked several times, flickering to nothing. Instantly, gravity took hold again, pulling Gavin, Seth, Isla, and the ship back to Earth. They reached terminal velocity within seconds, falling at over 100 miles per hour. Gavin grasped one of the hanging cords, reaching for Seth to pull him closer to the Athelbrath craft so they wouldn't be separated during freefall. "Grab my hand!" he shouted over the rushing wind. Seth's arms strained toward him, their fingers touching momentarily before the ship slowed in midair, slamming all three of them against the floor. Gavin tumbled down the ramp, hands sliding through some of the green paralytic left behind by the Athelbrath. Tingles ran up his left arm, deadening any feeling he had in his limb. He held tightly with his right to keep from falling and slowly pulled himself up. Climbing to his knees, Gavin stood, engine vibrations rippling from the ramp to his shaking legs. The vessel recalibrated, tilting from left to right before evening out and holding still in the sky. "You okay?" Seth asked. Isla came to her feet behind him, massaging her shoulder. "Yeah, my arm went numb. I touched some of that green crap and now I can't feel anything. I can't even move it." Isla walked over and touched his fingers. "It could be worse," she said. "Contact with oxygen breaks down the proteins in the mucus rather quickly. If you had touched it immediately, you would have been rendered unconscious. Your reaction is mild and should wear off in a few—" The ship whined like metal tearing to pieces and dropped out from under them again. "What the hell?" Gavin cried, tumbling through space. The wind pummeled his face a second time, ground approaching frighteningly fast. His right arm reached for anything within grabbing distance while his left flapped uselessly in the cyclone. Isla clutched his shirt and pulled Gavin toward the ship's interior. Seth held onto a vine cable for dear life, cheeks fluttering against the air pressure. "Pull yourself inside!" Isla shouted, São Paulo's skyline drawing closer with every second. "I need to get to the cockpit and slow our descent." "That's a great idea!" Gavin snapped, trying to hold himself in place with his one good arm as the ship nosedived. Seth's grip on the vine slackened. If he let go and floated even a few feet from the craft, they would lose him once Isla restarted the engines. Gavin pulled his right hand from the wall, knowing his left wouldn't be able to save him if he lost his balance in the fall. Lifting his feet like he had dozens of times during his skydives, Gavin pushed off the side panel and shot over to Seth. Pajama-covered legs kicked in all directions, forcing Gavin to grab Seth's ankle and tug him inside the ship just as it began to twist end over end. The centrifugal force pinned them against the wall. "Grab hold of something!" Gavin cried. "I'm gonna throw up!" Seth warned, view from the ramp alternating between sky and ground with each turn. Gavin clasped the structure as best he could, slick liquid still coating most of the surfaces. Slowly, the spinning world righted itself, and Seth's pale face colored slightly as the twisting stopped. Reasserted gravity pulled their feet to the ground, but without the intensity Gavin expected. He still felt light as a feather, left arm floating up beside him. Buildings below continued to draw closer. The pace of their plummet had slowed, but it didn't stop. "We're still falling," Gavin said, turning toward the staircase and racing upward. He stumbled into a long hallway illuminated by bioluminescent orbs that floated like dandelion fluff on the air. He swiped at one, air current moving it out of reach. The smell, more potent now than it had been near the open ramp door, made his eyes water and head swim. He dove forward despite the effects, reaching a room with darkly colored chairs growing out of the floor and what looked like a pool of water standing on end, rippling along the front wall. The shimmering mass reflected São Paulo's skyline directly in front of them. The screen, or window, or whatever it was, showed the city slowly growing larger. Isla sat in the lead chair, tendrils growing from the floor up to both of her hands and encasing them as if she'd been swallowed by a tree. "The main engines are not cycling back on," she yelled. "We aren't falling as fast as we were, but we will still perish on impact if we do not act." Seth ran up next to Gavin, stumbling as his eyes focused on the rippling pool of water defying gravity in front of him. "What is that?" he asked, pointing at the city's reflection on the surface. Isla pulled on the strange vines attached to her hands, tilting the ship back about 10 degrees. "I can fire the lateral boosters and launch us forward, but we will still continue falling if the gravity engines do not respond." Focusing on the image of São Paulo across the watery screen, Gavin saw a patch of dark green on the horizon. The sun had set, and lights blinked on in houses and offices across the city. The green section offered no illumination whatsoever. "You see that spot there with no lights?" he asked Isla, pointing toward the distance. "That's the state park. If we can make it there, we'll be home free." "I will do my best," Isla said, closing her eyes and settling into her large plant-like chair. Without warning, the ship shot forward, tossing Gavin across the room. He landed on his side, rolling into the wall. Seth hugged one of the chairs, teeth gritting, eyes shut tight. Pulling himself to his feet, Gavin watched as the dark spot on the screen grew ever closer. The ship began to vibrate, practically shaking apart at the seams. "Are we going to make it?" Gavin called to Isla. "I believe so," she said, looking over her shoulder. "But our landing will not be gentle." "I think I really am going to throw up this time," Seth warned, still embracing the chair. Trees came into focus on the screen, fading light turning them into one dark mass. 9 seconds, Gavin thought, wishing he could turn off his brain and not count down the exact time until they crashed. "Brace yourselves!" Isla shouted. Trees filled the watery monitor, several shooting past in the periphery. A powerful jolt shot through the craft, followed by another collision that spun them to the left. Gavin flew forward toward one of the chairs, crushing encounter imminent. He closed his eyes and hoped the afterlife would be pleasant.